In this tutorial, we're going to look through the inventory and item system within Survival RPG Engine. The item system in Survival RPG Engine is broken up into a few pieces. First is the items themselves and all of the information they store for unique functionality. Second is the inventory and container system that holds all of the items. This includes the player equipment and hotbar. Finally is the UI that brings it all together. There are various types of items that can be set up, and adding new ones is very easy. For equipable items, there are tools, weapons, two-hand weapons, and offhand items. There are also equipment, currencies, crafting items, consumables, farming, and building items. Backpacks let you dynamically change inventory size and can also be used directly on the character like equipment. Items can have types and rarities, allowing for unique setups. For example, higher rarity tools for harvesting. Let's take a look under the hood. Like most of the replicated systems, everything goes through either the player controller or the player state. The player controller has functions for opening the inventory and containers, updating the item UI, and opening other UI elements. For items, we can open the split stack UI, check for repairing, attempt to drop items, and move items between slots. All of these flow through the player controller into the player state. Within the player state, let's first look at the container UI functions. There is one function for updating an entire container, one to update a single slot, and one to update 2 slots. This ensures you're only doing exactly what is needed based on what you're changing. Each one of these functions will get the proper container, either the inventory, hotbar, equipment, or storage, and then pass that item data through to the UI. Storage containers are dynamic and are set when they are opened. There is also a function for updating the currency UI. Currencies are also items, but they are not stored in a slot. Next, we have functions for updating the container slot count, showing the item pickup UI when picking up an item, and opening the split stack UI to split item stacks. One of the most important functions is drop item on slot. This is called anytime an item is dropped onto a slot and has different functionality based on the container type. Move item is used to move items without a slot drop. For example, when right-clicking to quick move from a container to your inventory. There are multiple functions for loading and updating equipment. Load and set mesh is used to update the equipment mesh on the character. There's one for a single item, for one for the entire equipment list. There are also add and remove equipment binds. These are used to update attributes when changing equipment. Next up is the hotbar. Use hotbar slot is called when a hotbar button is pressed to select that slot. This will run through a series of checks to determine if the item is an offhand, if it's an building item, if it's broken or invalid, and finally what type of item it is. Based on the item type, what happens will vary. For example, equipable items will be spawned whereas consumable items will be used. World items are used to spawn and drop items into the world. This can happen if you drag an item out of your inventory or when you die. This is also used to drop items that you craft if your inventory is full when they complete. Finally are the rest of the container updates. Spending currency, opening and closing a new container, updating the total number of inventory slots when adding or removing a backpack, updating durability and ammo. Let's go back to drop item on slot. Almost all of the container-related functionality is housed within the container component. By default, this function simply confirms if the slot is the same one that it starts as, in which case nothing happens. That said, each container type has a child class that has its own functionality. Within the inventory child, we do a transfer item. This will look at the item type to see if it's a currency, if it's EXP, or an item. It will then check if the item can be added to an existing stack and if the slot it's being dropped on is empty. All item changes will call the onItemChange bind. This bind is set on the player state begin play and is used to update building requirements, weights, sprint speed, UI elements, and anything else that needs to update when an item is changed. Next, let's look at the hotbar. When an item is dropped here, it will check if the item is a valid type for the hotbar. First, it checks if it's the offhand index, and then confirms it's an offhand item. If not, it will check if the type matches any of the valid items types. If you want new item types for the hotbar, you'd add them here. Storage containers have very little custom functionality and simply run the base transfer item functionality. Finally is equipment. This works very similar to the hotbar, however it is looking for a matching equipment type to slot index. This ensures that you can only equip, for example, a helmet in the helmet slot. When making updates to the equipment slots, you need to change the order here. Next, let's look at the user interface. It all starts with the item slot. The item slot houses all of the details about the item that you see. On mouse button up and down are used to determine if the left or right mouse button is pressed and if shift is being held. This is used to determine what should happen, be it open the split stack UI. Try and move the item. Check if it can be repaired. If it's simply the left mouse button being pressed, it will enable drag detection, which will then call on drag detected if the mouse is moved without releasing the button. This will create a drag instance of the item that will store the required information to move it and hide the item in the slot. When this drag instance is dropped on another slot, it will pass that information to the new slot and attempt to move the item using drop item on slot we talked about earlier. Get Tooltip widget will open the Tooltip widget when you mouse over an item slot. This gets its information from the item details here. The Tooltip widget contains a number of different pieces of information, such as the name, icon, rarity, and description. On the item slot widget, we use binds for a few things. Firstly, the item icon and information is bound to item visibility. The size box at the top of the widget is bound to the Tooltip widget. The item visibility bind is used to show the item only if it's valid. Next is the item container grid. This is where we store the item slots. The grid will create the total number of slots based on the incoming information, and then add them to the grid based on the total number of slots per row. Update slot brings in all of the item data and displays it: the name, icon, durability, and type. Anything shown on the item is set here. The item grid is then used in the inventory widget. This widget sets the total slots per row, total slots, and the container type. Containers work the same way, with the main difference being that the rows and slots are sent by the container data. Equipment is a little different as it's more custom. It does not use the container grid and instead directly sets each slot manually. This includes the slot type and the slot index. This has to match the setup in the equipment container we looked at earlier. Finally is the Hotbar, which works the same as the inventory and containers. For the Hotbar, the offhand index is set within the player state and must match the index here. Next, let's look at the item data table. This is where you can quickly and easily make new items. The ID must match the row name, and the handle is used to look up the item. Type and rarity are gameplay tags. Equipable info is used for items that can be equipped. It has socket information for where to put the item, what animation states it should set, if it should use a detailed trace when using the item, and what animation to play. Animations are blended per arm between the main hand and offhand, so different blends can be set based on the item. Name, description, icon is for the UI. Drop item sizing allows you to change the size of the item mesh when it is dropped. This lets you make equipment smaller or other items bigger. Max durability contains if the item should break. You can set a tag for unbreakable if you do not want the item to have durability. Stack size is how many of the item can stack in a single slot. There are soft references for both static and skeletal meshes. Extensions and tags are used to add additional functionality. For example, the pumpkin seeds have an extension tag for plant info that lets it grow a plant. Finally, let's look at the item master itself. On begin play, we check if the item was dropped to see if we should enable physics, and we also check if it's auto-collect. Auto-collect items will be picked up when you move near them. Trigger interaction is used to pick up the item when interacting with it. Set item data will set all of the details of the item. Current item info stores the changeable details. The rest of the information is pulled from the data table, ensuring you can update items after release. The mesh is loaded in two different ways, one for an editor and one for packaged. Package will async load the soft references, whereas an editor will load them directly, so you can see them. For save load purposes, items use a GUID to ensure they are unique. This is automatically created when the item is set, but can be changed if needed. All you need to do to define an item is set its data table row, and it will update. I hope this has given you a quick rundown of the inventory and item system and how Survival RPG Engine can quickly and easily enable you to create your dream game. For more updates and videos, don't forget to like and subscribe.